Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Larry McDermott, and I have the honour of acting as Master of Ceremonies tonight for the book launch of Rebels to Reels. First of all, let me extend a warm welcome, a céad míle fáilte, to the extended Mcgovern family. Our American guests. As a local historian, over the years, people have shared their stories and experiences with me, thus broadening our knowledge of the wealth of heritage and history that this area has to offer. For me, one individual, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Mcgovern, US Air Force retired, stands out. Photograph, please. Stands out head and shoulders above all others, and above me too. I remember looking over them. That photograph was taken just 2 months before his 90th birthday. But to hear from him his lifetime experiences, especially his boyhood escapades here in Carrickmacross during the War of Independence. Now, Patrick Vincent Hoy, in his book Farney in the Fight for Freedom, related from the Irish volunteers' perspective events such as the attack on Carrickmacross barracks. Dan, as an eyewitness to the events within the RIC barracks, enabled us to complete the historical circle. It was a remarkable opportunity, provided by none other than our local librarian, Marita Hughes. Marita recognised that gentleman when he came in. Here she thought, there's definitely something. And she sent for me on the 24th day of September 1999. And she also rang Joe Mccabe. Now, Joseph, a dedicated journalist, and forgive me, Joe, when I say this, with a good nose for a story, Joe came along. A true professional, Joe took copious notes, and over the past 22 years carried out extensive and exhaustive research. Tonight, folks, we are here to launch the fruits of Joe's labour, Rebels to Reels, a biography of a truly remarkable man, Daniel A. Mcgovern. I will now call on Dan's nephew, Mike Mcgovern, to address you. Mike.
Thank you very much, Larry. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I am Michael Mcgovern. I am the son of, if any of you have read the book, of Malachi Mcgovern, the only other son of the sergeant that lived to adulthood, and many of our people are here. I want to thank Joe Mccabe for just coming into our family and doing this book, and he's become like family. He's done so much, and we're so impressed with the book, and we've been so pleased to get to know Joe, and we appreciate his research and the effort he put into and the things he came up with that even we didn't know, having had long connections with Dan, who came to our house, stayed with us, really kept up with us over the years. And so to hear 15 years after Uncle Dan died that we can read a book about him, that we all have our own stories. And now we see the full story when we read Joe's book. Dan was my uncle, as we've said, and he was my godfather. And he was a good uncle and godfather. He stayed in touch with us, even though he lived 3,000 miles away. would find a way to come to New York, see us, when I was in college in Washington, D.C. He visited me there. He came to family weddings. He photographed my wedding to Christine, my wife, almost 50 years ago. And some of my family were at that wedding. He was great. He also came to funerals. So he went with the good, with the bad. So we loved Uncle Dan. And we last saw him 2 months before he died. He visited Washington, came to dinner at my house with his son, Tim. And he was spending that week in Washington, special access for him and his son at the National Archives facility adjacent to the University of Maryland. It's where they called them the Mcgovern films. And he wanted to see, for one last time, he knew he was going to pass away. And we got to visit with him that week during that time. I want to thank all the Mcgovern relatives that have assembled. We have over 40 descendants or collateral descendants of Uncle Dan. We have, I want to make sure I name them all. The oldest was Marjorie, and Aunt Marjorie had Beth Baxter, and she's here. Beth, maybe stand up just for a second so we don't know who you are. And she's here with her husband Paul and her two lovely daughters, Lizzie and Katie. Okay. Then after Marjorie was Isabel, who had several children. The surviving one is Betty. I knew her as Mary, as Betty Ann. She's now Betty or Liz Peck. Will she stand up? Okay. And then there was Malachi, the second son, who often walked, I'm told from the book and from his own words, walked with my grandfather the last year or two before the independence or the surrender or whatever it is, as kind of escorted him to the barracks where he had to go for the evening. And he would walk back to the cottage on Distillery Lane down the main street. But he accompanied my grandfather, as Joe explains, and as my father told me, that he was kind of like a decoy or like a guard to protect my grandfather, the sergeant, from snipers in the forest or the woods off on the way back to the barracks from the cottage where he may have had dinner. Then there is Genevieve was the next one. Her daughter was supposed to be here, and then there's a family illness, and we have no representative of Genevieve. And then there was Anne Mcgovern, who married a Gaffney, and we have two Gaffneys here. We have Patrick Gaffney, my first cousin. Father, we'll see, he's also... While he currently lives and preaches in Bangladesh, he's been associated with University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, the Fighting Irish, for over 50 years. And he's only now in Bangladesh promoting Notre Dame in Bangladesh. But I'm sure he'll be back at Notre Dame in not too long. And then there's his younger brother, Mark Gaffney, who is here with his wife, Jean. Oh, he's in the back. And you should have been up in the front with the rest of us. And last but not least, the youngest child, who was born in right before the troubles of 1921-22, the children of, here in Carrickmacross, Elizabeth Mcgovern, who married an O'Brien, and the three living children, they're all living, so... We have Billy O'Brien, the patriarch of that branch of the family. we have Patricia O'Brien. Both of New York City, but they also have other places that they go. And finally, the baby brother, John O'Brien, who was the one this afternoon, it's on your national television, is shown taking the flag off the plaque, ripping a flag off, the United States flag, off the face of that building, facing that flag to reveal the McGovern Gate plaque of Dan McGovern and the McGovern family. So, John, what did I say? John.
She said I'm the youngest person.
Oh, actually the youngest, that's true. Anyway, this is, oh, my own brother, oh, yes. Oh, forgive me. Wait, I was last but not least. Peter McGovern deserves this, if he could stand up. And my beloved younger sister, Mary Ellen McGovern McDonough. And then my sister Annette couldn't be here, but she lives in Ohio. But Mary Ellen is in Virginia. I'm in Washington, D.C. And then, who am I thinking? Joni, yeah. Joni McGovern, stand up. And she's here with her three daughters, and her last name is Mullahy. And Mr. Mullahy is a full professor at University of Wisconsin at Madison. So we have two academics in the group at major universities. Anyway, not bragging about the McGoverns because Joe has done enough for us to brag for all of us. So thank you very much, Joe. Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to the rest of the program.
Thank you, Mike, for introducing us to the clan. Now I will call on Joe Mccabe to read an extract from Rebels to Reels. Joe.
In a house in the parish of Corduff, outside Carrickmacross, on the night of Friday, 29th April 1921, a group of IRA men collected jute sacks containing dozens of sticks of blasting gelignite. Each of the explosive sticks was 8 inches long and approximately an inch thick, and most were strapped together in bundles of 5. There was also an assortment of other explosive material, including large bags of industrial blasting powder and other explosive oddments. The IRA had decided that its 5th South Monaghan Battalion, as part of a much larger brigade force, would audaciously attack the RIC and the Black and Tans in their heavily fortified Carrickmacross district headquarters. The plan, just like at Ballatrain weeks before, was to blow a massive hole in the barracks, to force the RIC garrison to surrender and to capture its arms and ammunition. The station would then be set on fire and destroyed using petrol and tar. Buoyed up by the success of Ballatrain, 80 hand-picked IRA brigade volunteers from all over County Monaghan, including flying column active service members, started to converge on Carrickmacross town centre. By now, garrisoned there, including Sergeant Mcgovern, were up to 35 RIC men, of which at least 25 were Black and Tans. Like that of the Ballatrain attack, this was a virtually moonless night. 4 rebel detachments crept into the town centre from the west at around 10:30 p.m. 3 detachments accessed the rear of 3 adjoining 3-storey buildings and took up positions at the first floor level overlooking central Main Street and directly opposite the town's now heavily fortified and formidable police station. At ground floor level, these Main Street buildings contained O'Hagan's Pub, Shannon's Drapery and Shoe Shop, and the adjoining Hans Pub, which also housed a drapery shop. The 4th Rebel Detachment took up positions above another business premises further down the street. The elevated positions of these IRA detachments meant that they could bring fire to bear on the barracks' ground floor windows and on its front door over the new Sanger's sandbag wall and through its chicken wire mesh wire. This negated what protection the new defensive measure afforded the RIC from small arms fire. The job of these IRA men, when the time came, was to engage the RIC in the barracks and any policemen who might attempt to exit the main street from either the front door or via the alleyway which serviced the barracks farmyard. A young man was locked in a room in Shannon's and in O'Hagan's. Mrs. O'Hagan and her sister were locked in a rear room for their own safety. The Hand family were led downstairs and locked in their cellar, where they settled down, unsure of what was to happen next. Upstairs in these buildings, the IRA gunmen quietly took up firing positions at the first floor windows. It would be hours yet before they would go into action. As they settled down and waited, the IRA volunteers peered through the windows and across the street at their heavily fortified target, the features of which could clearly be made out by the dim electric light suspended halfway across the main street between the rebels and their main objective. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the town, and via the alleyway from O'Neill Street, an assault party entered Smith's Yard, located directly behind the barracks. In addition to their weapons, some of these men were heavily laden with the bulging jute sacks containing their gelignite and other oddments of industrial explosive material, plus a bucket of hand grenades. Others carried tins of petrol and buckets of well-diluted flammable tar. Further down the alleyway, 15 men stood in anticipation with their weapons loosely pointed over a low boundary wall towards the barracks' rear, now only some 60 yards away. The job of these men was to prevent any of the RIC garrison from escaping from the rear of the building and to fight their way into the police station via Daly Brothers once the explosives had blown and the adjoining barracks wall had been breached. However, that would be several hours away yet.
Thank you, Joe. Now, as Mike referred earlier, he mentioned that a member of the family couldn't be here today due to illness in the family, but through modern technology, she is able to address you tonight. Pat Tyson. We'll keep our fingers crossed. Technology.
Well, good morning. Actually, I guess it's evening there in Carrickmacross. I'll introduce myself. I am Patty Mcgovern Tyson. I am the daughter, in fact, the only daughter of Daniel Mcgovern, in which this wonderful book that Joe Mccabe published about my father. And it's an amazing book. I'm so glad that this book launch could take place on such a special day. I wish I could be there. I truly do. It was just bad timing for us and our family, extended family. Plans were set in concrete, shall we say, between July and August. So we just hope that we can be a part in spirit. I want to thank you, Carrickmacross citizens. It's a town that I visited twice. Many years ago in 1968, I actually stayed with the Daly family. Val Daly owned the hardware store, the Daly Hardware, next to the barracks. At that time, it was a functioning hardware store. So I saw Carrickmacross in a different time, slower time, and was able to just enjoy an Irish family for a weekend who were very hospitable. And again in 2011, I met Joe. I was introduced to him, I think a connection actually through my brother Tim, who had met him early on. And so we got to enjoy a day there in Carrickmacross. So I know the town. I hope to come back someday and see the area. It's beautiful. It really has grown from 1968 to 2011, and that's been 11 years ago, or 11 years ago. So with that, I just want to tell you a little bit about my dad. When you read the book, you're going to know a lot about his military life from the start, his keen interest in cameras and photography, and how he got started in that field, and then also Army Air Force, eventually the United States Air Force. And an amazing book that Joe wrote. I learned things I never knew my dad was a part of. Many of the stories I had heard a lot about him filming his own crash landing, heard a lot of stories of Ireland and during the Troubles, as he called it, in Carrickmacross when he would be with his father, Sergeant Mcgovern, my grandfather. So, but I wanted to tell you about my father as a dad, because we had an unusual relationship as a little girl because he was gone a lot. He was had 1 year and 1.5 year assignments and far away, and so I never really had that little girl relationship. But I was really blessed to have the adult relationship with him, and I learned so much from him and so much of what he did that I didn't understand as a child. So as my friends here in America have read the book and said, well, where's all the family gossip that they wanted to see? That's not in there. This is a biography of a military man that I found fascinating. I'm not necessarily a history or World War II buff, but my dad would be so impressed and so amazed at what Joe Mccabe has published in the book. One of the things Joe asked me to share, and I wanted to share, this picture is actually, oh gosh, this one I just realized maybe the one on the book, but my father had sent this to my mom and wrote the letter on the back. And you'll see the date is February 27th, 1945, which was, I was just a day old. And that was in Buffalo, New York. I never saw my dad till I was probably 1.5 years. Obviously, I don't remember that. I was just a baby, an infant. But what he wrote pertains to today, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. I don't know how much of it, I can't remember how much Joe had in the book. But he wrote this from Los Angeles, California, when he was at the, and you'll hear that in the book, first motion picture production studio in Hollywood. And he was under Ronald Reagan at that time. So that's another fascinating story of when they were producing films for the service training and all of that during the World War II. He says, "Dear daughter, this is really the first opportunity that I have to write you and introduce myself. Your wonderful mother, whom we both love very much, will immediately show you the picture of me, and that will have to suffice for the present. My present absence from home will not be long. For you see, Patricia, I am doing a little job so that you and Danny and your children, when the time comes, can live a normal life, and not be troubled with wars and dictators. And I don't want you to be not denied the happiness that America offers all people, regardless of race, color, and creed. When Dan came into this world, I was away off in England, and the picture in that part of the world at that time was ugly and dangerous. But with God's grace and guidance, I made a safe trip. And through that terrible flak and flight. So Patricia and Danny, take care of your mom." And he goes on just to just say a few other things, but I just thought how pertinent and how present that is for today, and how each of us as parents or grandparents want that for our children. So I just cannot tell you how much I appreciate Joe Mccabe. I don't know if with the pandemic and all the lockdowns, he just just got on to really the details of this book, but I think it's a book he's been working on for 20 years. And he has such a passion and such endurance and persistence to get to the truth and to have his facts backed up. And that's what I appreciated about Joe as we communicated back and forth. And fortunately, my husband was more of a World War II buff and probably listened a little bit better to details that my father would share that I didn't always process and understand that my husband really did. So if I didn't have an answer for Joe, then my husband usually did. Or Joe just did so many interviews. So Joe, thank you so much. I wish you great success for this book. I know every time I talk about it, it goes off and buys it. I love the hardback. I think it represents more better quality of the pictures. A lot of pictures in the book, which was an amazing feat at that. Trying to get access at a time that the National Archives were pretty much locked down, and the Veterans Affair. I mean, it was just like only emergency, communication periods. So I think I just recently got a communication that I emailed a year and a half ago to veterans to get an answer to Joe. So it is what it is. So I just think today is the perfect day to be launching this book. And I just want to thank you from myself and my brothers, and all our families that couldn't be there with you, my East Coast cousins, and your families, to celebrate this launch, a story of an Irish combat cameraman, Daniel A. Mcgovern. And thank you, and enjoy the evening. Goodbye.
Folks, that was Pat Tyson. Now we have, in the backdrop here, we have a B-17 bomber with Dan on the extreme left there. And those crafts carried no passengers. He might have been a photographer, but if they got into any trouble at all, he had to drop the camera and pick up a gun. He was expected to fight like anyone else. I now call on Joe to read another extract from Rebels to Reels. Joseph.
Bandits and Brownings. The German fighter pilots would attack the formations from all angles. But they had, of course, learned that head-on attacks, often from slightly above the highest lead elements of the formation, were the safest way to approach the mass formations given the lack of forward-facing guns on each B-17. Big Mac recalled, "We learned by trial and error that the Germans would attack the B-17s head-on, as they had little or no forward armament. We had waist guns, a gun turret on the top, a ball turret in the belly of the B-17, and guns in the rear in what we called the Stinger position, but little or no armament in the front. So eventually, they did put a gun there. For now, though, as the groups of the B-17s once again merged together over the rally point, the crews just had to combat the terrifying German frontal attacks as best they could with the guns they had. The 305th now tightened up its group formation as much as possible in the interests of mutual defence. The approaching line of black dots became bigger and bigger to the lead B-17s until the clearly defined front profiles of the oncoming sleek German Messerschmitt 109 fighters were clearly visible to the Americans. As the fighters made their final approach on the lead bombers, the flak ceased. Without the weight of their bombs, the B-17s were flying now at between 170 and 180 miles per hour, and the German fighters coming at them at well over 300 miles per hour, resulting in a closing speed in excess of 500 miles per hour. The fighters came on in what was the first of many head-on attacks that day, often with up to 6 fighters, line astern, one after the other, as they attempted to blast the bombers out of the sky. Frequently, the enemy fighters continued to fire to within only 200 yards of the oncoming B-17s before peeling off. For now, a few fleeting seconds, the pilots of the opposing planes were clearly visible to each other before the German fighters flew past the lead B-17s and into the main body of the American formation at tremendous speed. On the moonbeam, all the gunners opened up on the intruders as they flew through so fast that Dan had to do some quick adjustments to his camera to capture the German fighters, which followed. He remembered 24 to 32 frames a second was normal, but fighters were coming so fast through the formation that the best thing to do was to always capture them was to use 48 frames a second. When firing on enemy planes from B-17s in combat boxes well inside the formations, American gunners had to be careful not to inadvertently fire on their own aircraft. As Dan would soon find out, this was not always averted. As he filmed, he now experienced the intermittent staccato of machine gun bursts and corresponding dings of the empty cartridges as they continued to fall on the bomber's deck, fused with the excited intercom traffic chatter in his ears. Underlying all that was one constant noise, the drone of the bomber's engines. In addition to their terrifying full-frontal high-speed attacks, now the German fighters came at the formation from all points of the sky and attacked individual B-17s at every opportunity. Crew members screamed out the positions of the hostile fighters over the intercom as soon as they were seen, often 3 or 4 abreast, as they fired at the massive B-17s in front of them. More and more frequently now, the Messerschmitts and also Focke-Wulf 190s came at the Americans out of the glare of the sun, where they could not be clearly seen by the American gunners until the very last minute. Most vulnerable, of course, were the trailing bombers at the rear of the formation, the tail-end Charlies in Coffin Corner, where the least American machine guns could be brought to bear. Despite Mcgovern being located well inside the formation, the oncoming fighters still got through, and many frequently latched on to his B-17. As German 20mm cannon and machine guns blazed at the moonbeam and other bombers around her, the big 50s of the fortresses tried to counter the onslaught. Rounds of German cannon and machine gun fire soon tore through the moonbeam, inflicting more jagged tears and holes in her aluminium skin. But luckily, no damage occurred yet to seriously threaten the bomber or any of her crew. Then the left waist gunner, Sergeant Lewison, yelled out from over the intercom that bandits were now closing fast straight out in the distance from him. From the radio room hatch, Mcgovern was tracking a damaged Messerschmitt with his camera, when seconds later, a burst of cannon and machine gun fire again tore through the moonbeam. Lewison suddenly shouted out that he had been hit, but almost simultaneously, a round struck the steel helmet on Mac's head, snapping the chin strap and hurling the heavy helmet onto the deck of the radio compartment, where it rolled around continuously. Such was the force of the strike. Mcgovern instinctively froze and grimaced as he took stock of what had just happened. Lieutenant Ney, meanwhile, yelled over the intercom for Mac to render assistance to Lewison. As he moved to put down his camera, he noticed that 2 bullet holes in the interior radio hatch fairing were there over at chest height. These 2 had missed him by only an inch, but Mac realised that the holes were too big in size and were on the wrong side of the radio room to have come from the attacking German fighters. He now moved quickly to get to Lewison and rendered him first aid. He remembered waist gunners were frequently hit, as that was the most exposed position on a B-17. When that happened, I applied tourniquets and bandages. I always tried to make myself useful whenever I could. Lewison had sustained some minor cuts about the eyes when a series of 3 cannon rounds from the oncoming German fighters exploded to his left, tearing chunks out of the B-17 and cutting the ammunition feed chute of the Browning clean in half. Luckily, though, Lewison was not seriously wounded and soon got back to his gun. He rigged up a makeshift ammunition feed and soon continued his sweeping vigil of the skies before him. Mac got back to his filming duties too, but he now contemplated just how close he himself had come to serious injury, or worse. Thank you, Joe.
now call on the Cathaoirleach of Monaghan County Council, the Chairman of Monaghan County Council, Councillor Sean Conlon, to address you.
Thank you very much, Larry. And first of all, as the Chairman or Mayor of Monaghan County Council, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the travelling contingent from across the US, Wisconsin, Chicago, New York City and Washington, and to welcome you all here to Carrickmacross, some one or two maybe on a repeat visit, or perhaps it was only Paddy's been here before. But I suppose it's such an incredible experience to read about a member of your kith and kin and the huge impact that they've had, I suppose, in the earliest stages of camera work and combat situations. And Larry did refer earlier that where he was there to film primarily the combat situations, that he would be called upon or he would be expected to take up arms if somebody else was injured. And that was the case. I think it was the second or third mission that there was a comrade on one of the flights. He had an oxygen malfunction, and Dan had to fill that position as the waist gunner, securing a hit. And we talk about the conflict, not to glorify obviously, but just to the recording of history that Joe has completed here, and I suppose the very huge value that Dan Mcgovern had, and I suppose more importantly, coming towards the end of the book, in recording and having huge empathy, and some decades later making sure the footage of Nagasaki and Hiroshima were published. That to me was I suppose his last act in his military career that he would have considered most important, because no different to any conflict, you always look for, I suppose, reasons not to re-engage or reasons why there shouldn't be war. And of course, as we know from history, those two atomic bombs were so catastrophic. For my history serves me correctly, I'm not really much of a historian like Paddy mentioned, but I don't believe they were ever used again to any such effect. So I suppose that in itself is such a major contribution by Dan Mcgovern in the overall scheme of things. But just to turn to Joe, I've known Joe over, I suppose, at least 2 decades. I'm elected 23 years, and just talking about being elected, I welcome my other elected colleagues here from Monaghan County Council. I'm joined here by the Cathaoirleach of the Carrickmacross Castleblaney Municipal District. That's a more localised area, Councillor Aidan Campbell, and other colleagues who I just haven't been able to identify, but I know are present here this evening. And also, before I go much further, I'll not forget about you, Joe. I just want to say a huge, I suppose, gesture of appreciation and gratitude that is owed to Marita Hughes here. It was mentioned earlier at the very start, one of our former council librarians, and then of course moving over the years since that period, the work that has been achieved by our current and I suppose staff over the years, represented here by Deirdre Mccabe. Deirdre's over here hiding behind the door. So, and also from our museum section, Teresa Loftus is here as well. I spoke to Teresa earlier. But that, I suppose that's our contribution as a local authority in making sure, in partnership with Joe, the story would be told as far and wide as possible. And as I mentioned, far and wide as possible, I want to welcome all those who are joining us live streamed, as we've seen with Patty making her very considerable, almost emotional contribution, speaking of her father, and the indelible mark that he left on her, and as amongst all of you, in being such a considerate and kind, caring godfather and uncle, I suppose, and great uncle to some of the younger generations here. But just to say, to go back to Joe, to welcome everybody viewing overseas. But just to say about Joe, I've known him for a good number of years in his role as a journalist. He would have been following, I suppose, the activities of local authority business, amongst other, I suppose, comings and goings of our community and wider society, locally and nationally. And Joe, in his own words, I watched the video earlier today, having read through most of the book now, I haven't completed it all. But in his own words that he said in a video there, it was from a World War II sort of website, and he was being interviewed. And he talks about how a journalist has the instinct to be hot on the trail of a good story. Well, no doubt, Joe, the words are coming back to you. You certainly were, in this occasion, as is proved by the publication of your book, hot on the trail, and we are so thankful you remained hot on the trail of this book, because it's been nothing but a marvel to read. And you read the first part regarding before Dan and Dan Senior left Ireland and the family left Ireland. And of course, when some of you, maybe that's your first, most of you is the first time here, when you walk the streets, maybe you've done already, you did a plaque unveiling earlier, but you get such a true sense, as I did, you're nearly like an observer from a distant window, hearing the clatter of the crash and the rat-tat-tat of guns, and the fire enveloping Daly's and a few other locations. But it was written in such a gripping, dramatic style, and it's graphic to no end, Joe. It was such an easy read, and I don't read a whole lot. As Aidan and some of the councillors would know, we spend so much of our time reading local authority and government strategy documents and visionary statements and everything else, consultation things. So this was a pure treasure to get through, as much as I could, at least half of it. But then going on to the first raid that Dan Mcgovern, again, the detail of that being written, it was absolutely incredible. And what I did as well, watch the video of the Memphis Belle. Dan Mcgovern was hopeful that wasn't the chosen one, but it was obviously chosen for the curious name for it, bombing drive or bombing run or something there. That to raise the morale, and there was a name for it when they took the tour to America. The war, but yeah, bond, yeah. That I watched that video as well, just to get the capture of it and all, and it's absolutely incredible to think, and all the turrets, and again visualizing Dan on one of the waist gunner turrets in full combat mode with the 50 caliber weaponry, as was the position when they were on air raids. But just to go back to Joe, you're an absolute credit not only to Carrickmacross but to the work you've put in over the years. And I suppose it was like the pandemic over the past few years ago. It created an opportunity to just, right, I'm only just imagining, you says, right, I'm going to finish this, I'm going to complete this and get on with it. And we're so grateful that you did. So just a few items. I share something with our American visitors here in the sense of not just the affinity of the occasion and the book, but just I'm also an American citizen myself. So that's from a unique perspective. I'm also providing that welcome to you. And I knew while living in the States as an adult, I lived both times as a child and I went back in adulthood. We had a very good close family friend, Philip Newt Bonner. Newt, of course, from I think a previous Notre Dame coach or some famous sports person. But he had been a World War II veteran. He died perhaps maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And he had been part of the troops that freed up the concentration camp victims in Auschwitz. And I remember different occasions telling me the story about that and the graphic detail. And I suppose this is what the book has brought through as well. Some of the graphic detail, especially around Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So I just wanted to share that. Just on Notre Dame that I mentioned, and the Reverend, just to welcome you, and just to say, August 29th next year, Notre Dame are playing Navy in Dublin. So if you can't make it from Bangladesh to over to see them play games over in the US, they're playing in Dublin August next year. And just to say that your name was mentioned and your work obviously perhaps is in relief work or aid agency work in Bangladesh. I got a sense of Dan Senior. He had different postings around County Monaghan in his role as an RIC policeman, and of course coming eventually to Carrickmacross. But one thing was for sure, he was even with his role as enforcing and being the top enforcer in the area of law and order on behalf of the British government, he also knew the value of neighbours and family and community. He would have known, I suppose, without being told, what his young sons were going through at the local schools, being bullied, and well, maybe bullied wasn't said that, but a bit of intimidation and harassment and teasing, as children can do pretty much any time. But when their father was a leading enforcer of the local RIC at the time, he held true to, I suppose, his commitment, ensuring, I suppose, not only just state safety, but also to those around him, and that he lived amongst his community. And I know over years there's been a sort of a gravitation in the decades past around Gardaí coming from different areas, but it's great when they're established a long time in our communities because they do become such part of the fabric. And sporting organisations and community organisations, and they're a great asset. So similarly, talking about going back, I could just sense the empathy and compassion that Dan has handed down through the generations, and I commend your work in Bangladesh. And also what Paddy even mentioned, that Dan spoke of up to us in the letter written in the back of the photograph, how he looked forward to a time that, you know, people will get on with each other without resorting to conflict, regardless of race, colour and creed. And I suppose that's an empowering message that letter from 1945 should resonate with all of us. But I suppose I'll finish on this. Maybe I'm going on a bit too long. I've got so many other scribbles here, but I'll leave it for another time. But I just want to say again, thanks to everybody for coming along here. I'm sure it's the start of a fantastic experience. Maybe you're here a few days, I'm not sure. But again, just to thank, on behalf of the County Council, thank our library museum section, and all your colleagues, please pass them on to our various sections. And to Joe, finally, for your fantastic work. Gurmila Mccabe.
Thank you, Councillor Conlon. I now call on Joe to read another extract from the book. Joseph, please.
On the morning of Sunday, 9th of September 1945, all on the C-46 arose at 5 a.m. and had breakfast. Then at 5:45 a.m., with a bus, a car and drivers provided by the Japanese Navy, Mac and his team, as part of McCrary's correspondence party, drove off across the mountains for Nagasaki. It would be a difficult journey, as apart from the bad roads, it had now started to rain. For assignments such as this, Mac had now taken to carrying 2 personal IMO cameras, one loaded with black and white film and the other with colour, as well as a 60mm colour filmo and a stills camera. When he set out for a day's filming, all 4 cameras were always locked, loaded and ready for action. Dan remembered the unfolding scenes of the aftermath of the atomic detonation as they began to approach Nagasaki. Quote, "Every village we passed through was deserted, with not a soul in sight. Gradually the roads began to improve. Closer to Nagasaki, they passed through a series of tunnels. We saw large amounts of heavy machinery, aircraft engines, propellers, and aircraft tires," he recalled. As the party got nearer the city, among the hills and valleys, they began to see the physical evidence of the bomb's awesome power. Everything that was in front of a hill was destroyed, but everything that was on the lee side was intact. It wasn't even touched. Now, as we approached the city, we had a panoramic view of the valley below, naked and bare and almost lifeless. This was the Urakami Valley, to the north of Nagasaki city centre, and above which the atomic bomb had detonated. This city, which had been the setting for Puccini's opera Madame Butterfly, now looked like a moonscape. When they finally reached the outskirts of Nagasaki, at 10 a.m., the Americans had a welcoming committee waiting for them, which included a man dressed in a morning suit and a top hat. Maybe he was the mayor, but he had a table there with a flower and a little vase, and there was also some sake, Mcgovern recalled. Mac and his team, along with the correspondence party, were amongst the very first outsiders into the city, as no Americans or Allied occupation forces had as yet reached it. For information and advice, they made for police headquarters. And the superintendent of police, Dan, recounted, he was happy to see us, and after some tea, we sat down for a conference. They were informed by the police superintendent that as far as the local police were concerned, occupational forces led by the 2nd US Marine Division would not take over the city and its environs until September 23rd, 15 days away. In keeping with the official reason for their presence in Nagasaki, Lieutenant Mcgovern and the McCrary party first set out with a police escort Fukuoka number 14, a POW camp which had been established both in and adjacent to a disused Mitsubishi warehouse in the heart of Nagasaki's industrial area, and only 1.15 miles south of Ground Zero. This was a relatively new camp, housing mostly British, Australian and Dutch POWs. The warehouse had been remodeled to facilitate the prisoners, most of whom were used as forced labour in Mitsubishi's production facilities nearby, which included factories, foundries and shipyards. In his early months in Japan, Mcgovern always sought out former prisoners of war in the camps. We wanted to get to the POWs whenever we could find them, because we wanted the first-hand accounts. It was always very interesting. Upon arrival at Fukuoka number 14, the buildings of which were all but obliterated by the bomb, Mcgovern and the correspondents were informed that the American prisoners had already left and set off for the harbour areas in order to try and get home to the United States. One reason for this swift departure was that after the atomic bomb attack, a rumour had abounded in the camp that General MacArthur had sailed into Tokyo Bay with a fleet of American ships and was taking POWs out of Japan as fast as possible. Mac pointed out, the Americans in particular wouldn't stick around. They'd just get up and walk. They wanted to get the hell out. Tokyo was over 750 miles away.
Councillor Conlon referred earlier to the fact that Carrickmacross and Castleblaney, a combined municipal district. Well, tonight we have here the chairman, the Cathaoirleach of that combined group, Councillor Aidan Campbell. I call on Aidan to speak to you. Fantastic.
Thanks very much, Larry. Firstly, can I say a céad míle fáilte to all our American friends. It's great to have you home in Carrickmacross. I hope you're having a great time, and I hope everybody in Carrickmacross is making great of you, because I think they should. So, céad míle fáilte. Cathaoirleach of the county, Councillor Sean Conlon, who spoke very well. I know we have other elected members. I see Brendan Smith coming in earlier on there, and I know we have some of our council colleagues out the back. The event has been live streamed, so hello to everybody who's watching us live. So we're going to America, I'm sure, to all the Mcgovern family in America. Tonight, it's a great night with the launch of Joe's book. It's a fantastic story. I'm not going to go through any more of it than you've heard already, but tonight brings a story to life, and Joe's book brings a story to life. An incredible job done by Joe, an incredible story. The first thing this morning I got when I woke was a text from my sister in Dublin. Are you going to Dan McGovern's book launch in Carrick tonight? That was my sister-in-law in Dublin listening to the radio. So we're on the radio in Castleblaney and in Carrickmacross and in Monaghan, and we're on the television, even though we're pulling down the flag maybe that we shouldn't have been doing earlier on. So we're hitting the headlines, and that's great. So I think tonight could be the start of something even bigger. And I know Joe has plans, has further plans for the future, but we look forward to them plans, and we look forward to welcoming you back to Carrickmacross and to Monaghan in the future. We really look forward to seeing you again. Maybe finally, I'd like to thank Deirdre McQuaid here from the Library Services. As our Cathaoirleach said, Deirdre is working with the Library Services, and again, Miriam, well done to Miriam for the initial contact, so well done. But Deirdre and Teresa, Monaghan County Council are funding some of tonight's live streaming, so that's Deirdre. I was Cathaoirleach last year, and I got to work with Deirdre, a fantastic person, and as I said earlier, sometimes when you think of the library, you think of books, but it's much, much more than books. And all our information up here and our bits and pieces from our museum as well are worth having a look at. So, Joe, I want to wish you the very best with your book, and onwards and upwards. And thank you, everybody, and have a great evening. Gora Maigat.
Thank you, Aidan. Thank you. Now, Joseph, I'm going to call on you now to make a speech. No more extracts at the moment, just a speech. Let's hear it for Joe.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's taken a while, but I got here anyway. 20 years is quite a spell. It wasn't written all in 20 years. It was written in blocks. I'd leave it for a while and I'd go back like that. I just want to welcome you all here this evening. It's very honoured that you're all here, particularly the Mcgovern family from all over the United States. Here, look, both of them here. Sean Connell's an old friend of mine. We were in a diving club, by the way. Is how we got to know each other many years ago. And I always told everybody else all he was really looking for was the floating vote. But anyway, that's an old one, Sean. Yeah. But anyway, I just want to welcome you all here this evening. I also want to welcome the many people that I know are viewing from the United States, the many people that are viewing from Australia, including my own relations, the many people that are viewing from Japan, and the many people that are viewing from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I want to thank you all again for being here. It's a big honour for me. When I met Dan Mcgovern, I had interviewed so many different people and stuff over the years and that, and I sat down and I was listening to Dan, and this story started to unfold. And I couldn't really come to terms with it for a few minutes. You did what? And the next thing, yeah. And he told me all these things, amazing things that he did. And we got into the interview more and more and more, and it just became this jaw-dropping experience for me. It was one thing after another. Pieces of history that I'd been reading about for years and years and years and years and years. And I couldn't believe it. I believed it, of course, but he was the real deal. I knew that. And a lot of people have said to me, I said this to a few of you last night, and I said to a few other people have read this book of mine, and they said to me, at least half a dozen people have said, he was a regular Forrest Gump, wasn't he? But of course, it's true, because all these amazing periods of history, and here was a man from my town that had been there, experienced it, not just in my own town, but all around the world, and all these amazing events in history. And that he'd experienced it, and he'd filmed it for posterity. That was one of his greatest things. I want to tell you a little story, something I think is important. I'm going to tell you the beginning of this story, and don't let me forget to tell the end of it later on, because I may drift. Ever since I was a young boy, my father, God rest him, he died the same year as Dan, funny enough, my father Paddy. And he used to tell a story about our grand-aunt Teresa. My family was, on the Mccabe side, was reared in Thorney village in Marracloon. And I had a grand-uncle who was a rebel. And Black and Tans were after him. And my father always used to relate the story to me that the Tans raided one particular, very early morning, I think it was. And that my Uncle Eddie had been up early, as most people in Ireland would be, and he was shaving in the mirror. And in the corner of the mirror, behind him, through the window behind him, he noticed a Black and Tan. And he said, oh my God, I got to get out of here. So we cleared out the back window, right through it, skedaddled right up the hills at the back. At that moment, the Tans burst into the house. The whole house was asleep, a lot of people there. And they started going after him and firing on him through the windows, and they ran around the house firing on him. And there was a buck goat strayed into this hail of fire and was killed stone dead. And this story was told to me for many, many years. I may as well finish it actually now, because I think I can't really just leave it hanging like that. This is after my Uncle Brian had read the book, the draft of it, he said to me, he said, that's an amazing book. He says, I've only read 3 books in my life, he said. He said, I read Robinson Crusoe, I read a book on Red Cloud the Indian, and I read your book. And he read it in 1 week. Stand up, Uncle Brian, for a moment. Now I'm going to continue, and I'm going to tell you this story. Brian rang me, and he told me he really enjoyed the book. He said, did your father ever tell you about the time the Tans raided Thorney, our home, father's place in Maracloon? I said, yeah, many times. Did he ever tell you what happened? And I said, yeah, more or less. And did he mention Aunt Teresa, my great Aunt Teresa? And I said, yeah, I know there was something about something hidden or something. Well, the story was, the Tans were so mad they missed my granduncle that they started to tear the house asunder, looking for arms and ammunition or looking for anything incriminating. Now, if the Tans found incriminating stuff, anything, the house would probably be burned and the people more or less probably shot. That's just the way it was. And my grand Aunt Teresa was in the kitchen and she was petrified with fear. But in the kitchen was a regular RIC sergeant. And my father told me this story so many times that my Uncle Brian related it to me again the day he rang me. And the sergeant found a document, an incriminating document. And my Aunt Teresa could see something was about to get even worse. But strangely, the expected outcome was not what happened at all. The sergeant, instead of raising the alarm with the Black and Tans was with him, walked over to my Auntie Teresa, grabbed her by the arm, and held up what he found. You see this? You stick this up your arm. Now, up your sleeve, as quick as you can, or there's going to be hell to pay here. Put it up your sleeve. And she was flabbergasted. And she did. The Tans left, and the sergeant with them. And nobody was ever injured or harmed or anything. My granduncle still got away. And my Uncle Brian was able to remind me. I'd forgotten it because it's been so long ago. He says, that was Sergeant Mcgovern. So can you imagine all the years writing this book? And here was a story I had heard from I was really 3, 4, 5 years old. Little did I know that years later, this amazing man would have done something to save members of my own family. What's the chances of that happening? But I just wanted to relate that. I think it's very, very important. As I said, I met Dan. He was larger than life in every single regard. He was way up there. He was way up there in every single aspect of as a person as well. I think his story was so amazing. I knew the day I left, I walked out of the library that day, I knew I had to write a story. I just knew it because I'd never heard it. I'd read everything else. I'd read everybody else's books. I knew that this had to be a story that had to be written. I think that by you being here tonight, celebrating the launch of this book, it's the launch of my book, yes. But I believe that this is the first time ever that this remarkable man and his life and his career has been celebrated. And that's how I feel about this. I want to thank a number of people. There are so many people out there that helped me so much with this book. It's just impossible to list everybody. The back of the book, the acknowledgements is 4 or 5 pages long. I hope I haven't left anybody out, but it's there. But particularly here tonight and different things, I want to thank a number of people. And I want to thank, it's the most important thing to say is that this event has been very kindly sponsored by Monaghan County Library Service. And I want this lady in here to come over here for a moment, please. Please come over here, Deirdre. This lady rang me out of the blue. Come over here. She rang me out of the blue one day, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. She'd heard about my book somehow. I think it maybe filtered through. I don't know how it filtered through. And she said to me, "This is an amazing story," she says, "you've written, and this is quite a book. And you're having a launch." I said, "Well, yeah, I'm working on it now." Well, she said, "We'd like to sponsor your launch." And I want to sincerely thank you for that, because I don't think this could all have been possible. It's been busy, believe me, it's been crazy, but it's been worth it, so worth it. And I want to thank Deirdre McQuaid here, Monaghan County Library Service, and I want to thank Monaghan County Council, and our two Cahirlocks here, by the way, and the Monaghan County Council and the Carrickmacross and Castleblaney Municipal Council as well for all the help and support, because the support I've got from those people in terms of this book and where this book is going, with this remarkable man. This man's story has to be told to the world, and it's my job now to get the word of Dan Mcgovern out to as many places in the world that I possibly can. Although, I have to say, I have been getting messages from unbelievable places about this book and about this man's remarkable story. Thank you, Deirdre. Thanks so much. I want to thank the Mcgovern family for first and foremost being here. I want to thank Patty. Pat, I know you're looking in there, and all the rest of the Mcgoverns at home. It's an awful pity you couldn't be with us. Everybody here understands fully the circumstances and knows the reason why you can't be here. So I want you to just understand that. You're here in spirit, and we greatly, greatly appreciate that. I also want to thank my own family. God knows they put up with an awful lot. I'd often read chapters to them, and what do you think of that? Yeah, that's fabulous, and you get some constructive criticism here and there, different places, and it's been difficult for them sometimes because I'd be working late and working long hours. I'd be in the way. I often felt sometimes, but my mum I know is looking in there as well, and my sister Anne, my sister Orla in Dublin. Eugene's here, and of course I can't leave out Sylvester the cat, because Sylvester the cat, with his little intermittent, he'd jump up on my lap sometimes when I'd be writing, Between him and those little moments, it'd break that deep concentration sometimes, and it was really, really, really good. That and about, I wouldn't like to say how many thousand cups of coffee, believe me. I remember thinking another one, because I'd have a coffee before I knew where I was going. Monaghan County, the county, oh yes, Monaghan County Museum, I want to thank sincerely. And I want to thank particularly Teresa Loftus. Is Teresa with us? Ah, there she is. I want you to stand up, my good lady. This lady, we haven't actually met, believe it or not, until now. We will soon, but I feel like I've met you many years ago, because so many times on the phone. And the remarkable thing about this amazing gentleman here is he brought home photographs over the first visit he was here that were in the museum here, in Pedro Cassidy's museum, and it ended up in Monaghan County Museum. But Monaghan County Museum really hadn't any captions for these photographs. They didn't understand, what are these photographs? And as Teresa would tell you herself, one of the days I rang up and said, I'm looking for a particular photograph. She said, well, what is it? Well, I says, it's a photograph of black and tans on a lorry outside a cottage. And she said very prudently at the time, oh, I don't know now if I have that. But she rang me back about 6 weeks later. And she said, Joe, do you remember you rang me with that photograph about the black and tans on the lorry? And I said, yeah, well, I have it. I found it. I didn't like to say at the time, she said, because I knew I'd seen it, but I wasn't sure if I was ever going to find it. Right? But yeah, but she was great. But the great thing about it is she had these photographs and she hadn't a clue what they were of, because they weren't properly documented or something. And we were able to be mutually beneficial, I think, weren't we? Yes. And I was able to put the captions to the photographs, and I was able to use those photographs with captions in the book. So it was complimentary. So sincere thanks, Teresa. It's been marvellous. Thank you. It was great to get them. I want to thank the workhouse here, Yvonne and Kevin and the staff. And I want to thank, in particular, thanks to John. John was here one morning before, And there was something planned. There was a bit of a mix-up, and he was here very early in the morning, and nothing happened. We didn't turn up because it was a mix-up. I think it was on my part. I want to acknowledge that and say to John, thanks very much. He's been so helpful, the whole staff here, arranging all this and, you know, facilitating everything for me and all my team here, and it's been fabulous. The plaque was something, I have to tell you, was not my idea. I was up selling the book at what I've always called it Mcgovern's Gate at festival time here, and I wrote on Facebook that, you know, here I am at Mcgovern's Gate, and this is where Dan and the family ran up and down for all those years before they went to America, and that resonated with somebody. So I think anyway, it's certainly Carrickmacross Chamber of Commerce and President John Tobin, if John's here. Thanks very much for having the foresight about this, this plaque idea was fabulous. This plaque was turned around in something like a remarkable period, I think about 3 weeks or something, we managed to get it sorted. They came with this amazing proposal, and I said, Joe, we want to do this, but you're the only man really knows about him, so would you mind writing it? So I said, no problem, that's fine. The Carrickmacross walking tours were in on it as well. I think the Tidy Towns were in on it. Am I missing somebody, Larry? Is that 3? Was there another group? As I say, I was an outsider, so Chamber of Commerce I mentioned, yeah, and the walking tours and the Tidy Towns. I think there was another. If I'm missing somebody, please tell me, and I'll announce it here now. I wanted to particularly thank Carrickmacross Gardaí and Inspector Coughlin down there. Stand up, Inspector. Stand up. Inspector Coughlin has really pulled out all the stops. He's worked so hard on this, and you know there was a bit of a buzz, I think, about the station, the fact that you were coming, and you know they've really worked everything. And the inspector managed to get you down into what was, you know, the Mcgovern's last home, and not the last home, the second last home in Ireland, and into the station and through there, and what's a very busy working station, of course. And just for those of you that may not know it. Daly's then ironmongery, or the Daly's hardware as you probably these days call it, has been absorbed into Carrickmacross barracks. So the right hand part of it that's now part of the barracks was the original hardware store, and it was in there that the bomb was planted. So the plaque is pretty close, you know, it's pretty close to where we needed to have, but it's pretty good. Now, I hope I'm not leaving anybody else out. There's so many people out there that I needed to thank. I hope I've left nobody else out. But one particular person I want to particularly make mention of here. And that is former librarian of Carrickmacross Branch Library, Marita Hughes. Marita, would you mind standing up for a moment? If you just for a moment. This lady here made the phone call that made this book happen. That photograph was taken with me and Dan in the library. And all this whole story, 20 years in the making really, I suppose, of putting it together, would not have happened without that fantastic lady down there. She had the foresight to ring me and tell me about this amazing man that had this amazing story to tell. And I want to acknowledge that. And I want to just do something now in recognition of Marita. Have we got what I'm looking for out there? Yeah, very good. Just 1 second now. Just bear with us, folks. We haven't much more to go, I think, but while we're working on that, I want to say Daly's Ironmongery, okay? Would Mona Daly please stand up if she's here? There she is. The Dalys and the Mcgoverns were great friends because they lived next door to each other. And Dan used to talk about it all the time. In videos I've seen, and he mentioned it, of course, to me and different. And it's wonderful to have Mona here and her husband. and have the Mcgoverns here, because here we are generations later after this amazing story unfolded. And here we have the families, you know, and there's a link there. I like to think, by the way, before I go on with what I'm about to do, I like to think that this particular day that's in it, for me, it is a celebration of Dan's life, but it's also something else. It's a closing of a circle. It's a closing of an historical circle in Carrickmacross. And I have to thank the people of Carrickmacross, apart from, I've mentioned the Chamber of Commerce and all the different groups that had the foresight to go ahead with the plaque today and all these things, but it's the people of Carrickmacross that put that plaque there. The people of Carrickmacross, that the goodwill is resonating towards the Mcgoverns in, as was said by Councillor Campbell, or Cahira before, in welcoming the Mcgoverns home. Huh? Oh yeah, I want to do the flowers first though. No, just one wee second. This is a very, very small return for what this lady has done for me. Because the hard work that it took to produce this book, the endless hours, the research, all of it, would never have happened without this lady here. This is one class lady, and I think the world of her. Marita Hughes. Here we are. Joe.
Now, I'll take it and put it back on the table. Yep, right, okay. Thanks.
Just bear with us just for a little while. There's something important I want to say. There's something just not at all. It's such a small thing I've done. Of course. Yeah. Just before I move on, I want to thank all the my ex-teachers, by the way, that taught me English and different things. Breda Maroney Ward and Michael Smith, are they here somewhere? I think they're here. Oh, they're out the back. I see them there now, and Pat Drury hopefully is there too. Down the back. By the way, the sound crew and Adam there doing all the visuals for us. Sincere thanks, guys. It's been very professional. It's made all the difference. I think Dan Mcgovern's story is just pure visual, isn't it? Really, when you think about it. I mean, he was such. I often said, I said this morning, I think it was, man dear, if Dan Mcgovern had Twitter or Dan Mcgovern had Facebook, he would have had those images from Nagasaki. God, there would be no suppression. No way. Just bear with me a moment. There's something I want to. By the way, if I may, I hope I've thanked everybody. Please, if I haven't or left anybody out, please tell me, and I'll make up for that. This is the original article that I did on Dan Mcgovern when he visited here in 1999. And he was very fond of that article, and so much so that he framed it and stuck it at the back of his office behind his chair. And it stayed there to the day he died. And I love the idea of that, you know. That's what started it all. And I have so much left over from this particular article. That's really what was the basis of this, you know. I just want to bear with me a moment. Bear with me a moment. I hope yes. I want to read a letter, an email that I received only in the last couple of days. No, go back where we were. Fine, this one. This is Don and Doris Moore on the wedding day on the 27th of August, 1942. Don Moore was a pilot with the 305th Bomb Group, with which Dan Mcgovern flew and filmed, and they were based in Chelveston in England. And this was at a time in 1943 when the 8th Air Force was really ramping up its bombing missions against Nazi Germany, and there was targets in Germany and France and different places. I received this email some days ago from a lady in Colorado Springs called Teresa Platt. And I want to tell you that Teresa Platt, I know, is looking in here now in Colorado Springs, viewing from Colorado Springs. And she sent me this email that, quite frankly, knocked me for six. And it reads as follows. I want you to note the date, the 27th of August, 1942. This is the email. Dear Mr. Mccabe, your book may be about Dan Mcgovern, but in the process, it has affected people you never could have imagined. The pilot of the B-17 Moonbeam Mccabe, which crashed on the Watton raid in France, killing him on the 27th of August 1943, was Lieutenant Don Moore. He was my grandfather. Your book, Rebels to Reels, has for the first time given us a vivid account of the circumstances in which my grandfather Don lost his life all those years ago during World War II, and on what was also his first wedding anniversary. My grandmother Doris received a telegram informing her that her husband Don had been killed on the very same day that their son, my father Doug, was born. In addition, we always knew there was a photographer on that plane. Now, this is not Dan Mcgovern, it's another photographer. There was two of them on this mission. But we never had a name for him and assumed he was killed in the crash too. It was a question we'd had in our family for almost 80 years. Your book has not only answered that question, but informed us also what happened to that photographer, who was Bill Wood. And here is something for you. The B-17 Hellcat, on which Mcgovern had his first crash landing, was in fact Lieutenant Moore's more regular plane. It is the only B-17 he flew, which he referenced to my grandmother. He sent her a picture of it, and one may be even taken by Dan Mcgovern. That's the picture. Wow, what a surprise, she says. Thank you. So, I just thought I'd end on that note. That just knocked me for six. My book is about Dan Mcgovern, but I know I researched it pretty well, I think. But to get an email like that makes all the long hours, all the long days, and the burn in the midnight oil worth it. Thank you very much indeed, every one of you.
Well done, Joe. Before you escape, Joe, there's another side to Joe, I believe. We know when we've heard tonight Joe the author. What about Joe the poet? This might come even as a surprise to his Uncle Brian. Yeah. Sock it to them, David.
You may not know it, and some of the local people may not know it, but I love writing poetry. It's a side to me I've always kept quiet. I haven't told many about it, but it's just sometimes I'm moved to write poetry. And for this particular occasion, for me, it's one of the most important days of my life, no question. Dan Mcgovern he's become an integral part of what I'm about, you know. He did all the things that I've only read about and would have loved to have witnessed. So just bear with me. This is a few words I've penned. I call it Mcgovern's Focus, but that's a working title, but the main bit of it's coming up. Mcgovern shot neither bullet nor shell usually. Instead, he had a visual story to tell of historic events for Air Force Command with his movie or still picture camera in hand. A police barracks in Ireland was his boyhood abode, where a rebel explosive had failed to explode. From a conflict that tested his early resolve, a remarkable cameraman would later evolve. For Uncle Sam's Air Force, he found nothing fonder than flying aloft in the wild blue yonder. He filmed on aeroplanes at high altitude, shooting images for history of great magnitude. He filmed in the White House for FDR, but cameramen were needed to film the war. And to train them, they needed the best that they had. So the Air Forces called on their young Irish lad. He taught all his rookies about camera perfection, about IMOs and filmos and lenses selection, about angles, perspective, and what film to use on the ground or in airplanes with busy air crews. Into the fight for the freedom of nations, he sailed off to Europe to film formations of B-17s. What a sight to behold! The 8th Air Force's story, it had to be told. He flew through the gauntlet of fighters and flak. There was always the chance he would never come back. Yet Big Mac he filmed through this aerial hell to make famous a bomber called Memphis Belle. Twice he crash-landed with engines all out. This meant that his Air Force career was in doubt, but a stateside recovery in all was terrific. So our Dan was deployed to film the Pacific. Into Japan at the end of hostilities, provided all manner of film possibilities. But in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, he filmed in awe all the atomic devastation and death that he saw. He could have gone home, but he decided to stay. For him, for posterity, come what may, the historical footage we all have today of this combat cameraman, what more can I say?
Follow that. Now we have a little treat for you. I've called it Reeling Back the Years in Carrickmacross. Reeling back the years to 1982. It's a brief video film made in 1982. So roll it there, Colette. Colin. Flipping his hat by the convent gates. there's little more for me to say, other than to say that signed copies of the book will be available, signed by the author, and they'll be available here afterwards. And that there's refreshments, courtesy of the workhouse here tonight. There's tea and coffee, I believe.
There is, and there's some more, I hope, as well.
Right. So I hope you enjoy the night, and thank you for coming along.